Hey everybody! Last time I talked to you, I promised I would show you how to weave in ends on your mittens so that you could finish them out. So let's go ahead and just get started and learn how to do that. We'll jump right in, picking up a darning needle. We've got our finished little mitten, but we've got all these loose ends. I like to start at the bottom cuff. I take that loose end and I put it on that darning needle. And we'll go ahead and pick it up and look a little closer here at the pattern we have, because what we'll do is try to make the cuff match. Instead of having a weird knobby place here or a notch, we're going to try to finish that out so it matches almost seamlessly. We'll do our best. This is how I usually do it. Okay, see the knot where you started your cast on? I take this first loose end and tuck it behind that knot and sew it through, and that starts to close up that gap. On the back side, you'll want to go around and find one of those sort of pearly looking nodules, darn through it, and one more time I like to go through the front under that loop we just made, around, back near our starting slip knot point, right next to it, in the purl next to it. Take your darning needle, slip it through. Do all this gently, don't pull too tight or you'll just have a wonky part there. You want it to be kind of the same tension and match. So you see how it kind of closes that up? Then on the back here, I'm going to remove my darning needle because I'm ready to tie it in. What I do, I don't weave my ends in like a lot of knitters do. I knot them in with little tiny knots, and I've never found it to be troublesome or itchy, and it always stays in place. So I take the plies of this loose end and I split them right now, and 2 for each side. So you split it with the darning needle and gently tease that apart. Don't pull too terribly hard or it will snap. Okay, now you have 2 pieces of string from that one loose end. I'm going to put half of that, or 2 of the plies, back onto my darning needle. And sometimes it's a little argumentative because now it's fluffy, but just keep trying and you'll get it on there. Sometimes if it's sassy, you can twist it back together and that helps a lot. All right, get back on there. Take that back to where it came through, where it comes from. Go around, darn right through that whole, the same loop, and make it, the end come right back out next to the matching one here with the other 2 plies. All right. Now that we've done that, it's anchored to the stitch, so it's not going to slide around. And then we're going to tie our knot. Watch my hands when you do this, because you're going to have to swap the knot ends, or the tail ends, or it will slip. So 1 in each hand, then we tie a knot. Once that knot's tied, pull it gently, but not too tight or it will mess up the tension. Now switch your hands and trade ends and tie a second knot. By doing that, you're creating a knot that sort of fights against itself and will stay tied. Check it, make sure it's not slipping. If it is slipping, give it 1 more tie. And since mine's not slipping, I'll go ahead and clip the tail ends off here. Okay. Say goodbye to those loose ends at the bottom, and let's check out how that came out. Tug it gently, because if you didn't tie the knot correctly, it will come loose and you'll have to tie it again. So tug it gently to ensure that it is anchored. Once you know it's anchored, really give it a good tug to make sure that it goes into its normal resting place. You can see there's not going to be a little knot hanging around. It tucks in really nicely and you can barely see it. Once we've got that bottom knot all cleaned up, I like to go up to the top. We'll put our yarn from the loose end at the top onto our darning needle, and we're going to close up this little hole and make it look pretty. So kind of insert your hand into the needle a little bit so you can check out the hole you have. If you look very closely on the opposite side of where your yarn tail's coming out from, you can see a little knit V that you can loop into. So anchor your needle into that, pull it through, and what we're going to do is kind of create a mock knit stitch that's going to match. So you've got it through there. Now bring it back down through the hole from where it came. And we're going to pull that straight down into the mitten, and we'll turn her inside out from there. But I'd like to show you what that creates before we do so. Now you've got a little stitch right there at the top that blends in with the others. We'll go on the inside and tighten it up so that little fingers don't go through the mitten hole, but we want to do that decorative stitch on top to really finish out the mitten. Once you've gotten back inside, sort out where your tail is coming from. Hopefully these guys aren't confusing you. Focus on one tail at a time if you can. And we're going to go and clean this up so that it's tight and no little fingers can go through the holes. So I like to just run my needle through these holes that are kind of looking like purl stitches on the back side here, and zigzag it from side to side of the hole here. And I'll do that all the way across, and it will close up that little gap to help keep the cold out and your fingers in once you wear your mittens. When you've gotten all the way across and closed up that little tip, I always like to flip it right side out again and double check that that did not mess up our decorative stitch and it still looks pretty, and it does. So go back inside. We're at this point going to take that loose end off the darning needle. My tail is really too long to work with right now, so I'm going to trim it up to 6 or 7 inches and get rid of that excess. And then we're going to split that tail again like we did before into 2 plies on each side with the yarn I'm working with. And sometimes your yarn's going to have different amounts of plies, but split it up in even amounts as best you can. Split that, put one end back on your darning needle, and we'll just anchor it to the stitch that it's coming from. Get that there so you can see. And right through to meet its other half. And then we'll tie a knot as we did before. One side in each hand, around, through, pull gently but not too tight, then switch sides and make another knot. Pull that one tightly. If it's slipping, then it's not the correct knot. Make one more round of a knot if it slips. If it's not slipping and you can pull on it and test it and it's not going anywhere, then you know you can clip it. And sometimes you got to get a little bit closer to get all the fuzzies. And just give it a good little tug to make sure you got everything in place and sturdy. And then turn her right side out one more time. Now we've got the top and the bottom finished. All we've got left is our little thumb and the thumb hole. And we will go ahead and start with the thumb topper here before we close that gap at the base, because this is just more simple. So we'll do the easy stuff first. Clear out all those loose ends away from this so they're not confusing to you. And we're putting the thumb end onto the darning needle. We'll weave that in just about the same way we did the top, but we're not going to do any fancy closing stitches. We'll just take it, run it down through the middle here of the thumb. We're going to bring it in. These tiny, tiny, tiny mittens are a little trickier because it's hard to turn the thumbs inside out with this small of a project. It's a little easier on a bigger mitten, but we're going to pull that through the thumb, and then we'll turn the thumb inside out to find our end here. Looks like I got it looped through part of my thumb. See, accidents happen all the time. Don't worry about it at all. Just remove that darning needle, gently pull her through. Okay, now it's coming from the top where we wanted it to come from. Put that darning needle back. If you didn't make a mistake, you wouldn't have to do that part, but that's okay. We go up here and we're just going to loop it through a couple of these pearly looking stitches just to anchor it in. We're not doing too much closing or decorating with this because it's not as big of a gap as the top. And then I'm going to go ahead and tie that one in as well. Again, that is a little long for me to work with, so we'll trim it off and then split the plies. Put one back on the darning needle, if she will participate. Then go back where she came from, right there. Loop it through to anchor that loose end to one stitch, and then we'll tie a knot again. So, around. Pull it gently, not too tight, remember. Switch hands, tie your knot again. Now pull more tightly, but slowly to test, because if it slips, you can mess up your knitting a tiny bit. So gentle, and then once you realize it's tight, pull it a little more firmly just to make sure. And trim your ends off the same way we did with the other loose ends we've done. All right, the thumb is all done. So we'll push it back into place, right side out, and double check it. Stretch it a little bit to ensure everything is where it belongs, and move on to close that gap at the base. These gaps are quite big, so we are going to sew along and in the same pattern as the knitting, and kind of a duplicate stitch sort of method. So let's get our loose end on our darning needle and get started. I like to hold the mitten with the thumb almost flattened out here, and the top of the glove a little bit more flattened out so I can read the stitches a little better to make it match. So the first thing I'd like to do here is bring this V to complete it into a knit circle. I take it under a stitch over here, and we're going to align our knitting a little bit more like weaving in ends rather than the knotting I usually do. And you follow the stitch pattern around to sew it in so that the pattern matches. And that closes off the thumb gap. Now we're going to go up here, following the stitches. See, I'm going to follow this one now up to here and go out. Follow the stitch so we don't make any messes, and then this will cross over here under to the other side, where we're going to follow another stitch around to close up the gap. We're going to follow this stitch right here, going through, pull it fairly tightly and see what gap is left. Follow your stitches around to close any remaining gaps, and bring it around to match the pattern. This gets a little fiddly, but it's completely worth it in the end to have a really pretty little mitten. And I see I have one little hole left, so I'm going to follow this around here as best I can. It starts getting a little confusing when you get real close to the seam here. So the best thing to do is just try to make it match the pattern of the knitting as best you can. And then at this point, I'm going to go inside the mitten and turn her inside out. But let's check and make sure it's stretchy without a big hole and pretty. And we'll turn it inside out. Double check there aren't any crazy big holes that you need to close from this side. And if there aren't, you can go ahead and anchor that in with a knot on one of those loose stitches. For this, try not to put your knot up here where this part of your thumb is going to be, because it can get itchy there. Bring it down here or here, and then it won't be so itchy and you won't notice it's there at all. Split your plies. And this is why we tend to clip those longer ends, because it'll get tangled. We can clip it now since it's tangled. Put one on this darning needle. And find the stitch it came through. Anchor it to that stitch. Bringing it out next to its other half. And we'll do a knot here again. And switch hands. Knot here again. And pull slowly to make sure it does not slip. When it's tight, clip it off. And you have a finished mitten. Turn it right side out. And you are all finished. I hope that helped. Have a wonderful day.